And it's been wonderful having extra time with Frank and Philip over these last couple of days. And one of the things certainly that's true about these gatherings such as this is the importance of informing and educating and stirring people's hearts. And Frank, I think that's a lot what you have been about for a long time now. Certainly one of the keys. And so I want to ask you, Frank, to start off with one of the great frustrations that we find ourselves living with in these days is trying to get into the hearts and the minds and the souls of those that are the younger ones. And we talked about that a bit last night. And I just want you to speak to that and even give some helpful suggestions as to what we can do to try to make this regard.
Well, thank you. First, let me just say how deeply grateful I am to Bill and to Dick and to Pastor again, but also to all of you for being here. This is not easy to take aboard, is it? This is not something that makes any of us happy to hear. And to Bill's point, that means that it's that much more difficult to share with the people that we love and that we know need to be at least as informed and at least as engaged as you are, or at least we hope you are, in this fight. And I remarked yesterday when we were out on the other side of the state about the fact that there were few younger folks in the audience, as there are here today, as there are mostly, frankly. Partly that's a function of the fact that they're busy, they have other things that they're doing, they've got kids that they're attending to, and all of the things that go with that. But frankly, partly they've been encouraged not to want to hear this information. You may have had this experience yourself in talking to your own children. We have to overcome that, folks. I've come at this from the perspective of somebody who, like Phil, had the privilege of working in the government a long time ago, in my case. And having a sense, a first-hand sense of how absolutely essential it is to the policies of our government that the public is seen to be supporting whatever the course of action is. They don't always pay attention to it, heavens knows, but they do, generally speaking, not pay attention to things they think you don't care about. So it simply goes to the heart of our republic that the people who are making policies or laws for us are supposed to be representing us. If they don't know that we want them to do something, the chances of them doing something, especially if it's hard, especially if it's clearly the case that there are people amongst us who do not want them to do something, the chances of them doing the right thing are greatly reduced, suffice it to say. And the likelihood that they'll do the right thing is a direct correlation of the fact that they're hearing not just from the handful or the odd person, the email that comes in, the phone number that rings once in a while, but from large numbers of people. So I just, as I said in my remarks, I really hope that you'll take away from this really extraordinary program, hearing from the sorts of people you've heard from, the personal testimonies of what is afoot, not just someplace else, but right here, as they say in River City. That you'll take away from this a mission, a calling, a mandate a duty to do the following. Just today, tell somebody what you heard. Anybody. Your kid, your husband, wife, your neighbor. Just try it. And when you do it, I think this is what Bill wanted me to specifically say, I really encourage you to do what I have found to be incalculably helpful, which is not try to get in their face and tell them what they need to know and think about this problem, because you know how serious a problem it is. Nothing is more off-putting, especially with your kids, right? But if you can communicate like Phil Haney does, or Farah does, I try to, but they do, in a soft-spoken, understated, informed, thoughtful, loving way, that this is truly about the survival of freedom. Which, whether they like it or not, if they are the younger cohort, is soon going to be their responsibility. Because us old folks aren't going to have to be fooling with it anymore, or able to. The combination of your belief that what you are telling them is important for them to know, and that you're telling it to them in a way that they can hear. It may not be one conversation, given the pressure not to hear it, not to want to hear it, but trust me, if each of you will do that one thing today, or tomorrow, Father's Day. They're supposed to listen to you at least on Father's Day, aren't they? Take advantage of it. But just start in a small way. And if you'll do that on Monday, when you're back at work with somebody you work with, again, you know how to deal with it. It will catch fire. And what we're going to try to do, as I mentioned to several of you during the break, is to help, as Phil Haney is doing right now, day in and day out, right here in Michigan, trying to spread the word and have these kinds of conversations, and we hope to be able to do more help in that regard.
Yes, Frank, and thank you. That's actually the question I'm going to be addressing to Philip. But you put your heart and soul and your money where your mouth is, Frank Gaffney, in the sense that your heart is to get this word out there. And so we're thankful for your support in a big time way of bringing Phil Haney to the state of Michigan. And so we've had Phil here now since the beginning of the month, and it looks like we're going to be able to continue into July. And I want to ask Phil to just comment, Phil, give a couple of examples, just to start with, in terms of the different meetings that you've had, and what kind of response you feel that you're seeing, and what are the implications of just one meeting, perhaps? Because I know your view is that something happens beyond that one meeting.
Well, right now there is a deep undercurrent flowing across our country. It's like what I call an artesian river, literally flowing right underneath this building, if you will. I know that because I've been traveling pretty much non-stop for a little bit more than 2 years. And I saw this whole process develop before or during the presidential election. Now here we are in the midterms, and I'm seeing the same thing. That doesn't mean that I take it for granted. That's actually an encouragement to get even more involved. And in particular, from outside, I don't live in Michigan, but I've been up here. This is the 5th, I'll call it, tour now, in the last 2+ years. I've seen people like Dick Manasari. It's like learning a language. And it's like he's moved to a new country, a new subject, that he's learned an entirely different language very quickly. He's become fluent. And he's blossomed into a person that probably 2 or 3 years ago would not have ever necessarily imagine that he'd be working in this arena at this point in his life. And I'm just an ordinary person too, who by a preposterously impossible sequence of events found myself an eyewitness to everything from 9/11 right up to where we are today. I have a great love for our country. I have been in hundreds of groups, and there are thousands times 10,000s more across the country who are coming to a point of realization that this is not something that happens maybe every year or so, kind of ordinary, or even every decade, but this is something that is generational. And that I've also realized that encourage my fellow Americans that age is not a qualifier or a disqualifier, that we are really here to leave a legacy, and that each one of us has an arena or an area of influence. It's not really the burden that we bear to quote unquote change the world. The burden that we bear, the responsibility that we have, what we can grasp, is to influence those who are immediately around you, whether that's your family on a daily basis or people that you meet along the way. And it's something, and it's kind of a form of discipline, that you're going to be deliberate and intentional and purposeful about it. And what it's really all about, friends, is our sovereignty, our right to choose the form of government that we would live under, rather than, as the global Islamic movement would do, is define our sovereignty as Sharia, and or the progressive leftist movement, for that matter, that defines sovereignty as something that's diverse and inclusive, and definitely not racist, and has nothing to do with white supremacy. Both of them are seeking to alter or abolish the current form of government that we have and replace it with one that's more suitable to their worldview. So, what I'm trying to do is encourage my fellow Americans to get involved, to stand up, to do what you can do. You know, the Bible says if you give somebody a cup of cold water in His name, you will receive a reward. This is not building a cathedral or a high-rise. This is something that each person, starting exactly where you are, can do and build on it from there. That's how all of us started out, day by day, and by His grace we've stayed with it. You can do it. We are just people who found ourselves, ordinary people who found ourselves in extraordinary circumstances. And this is a generational thing, friends. This is an opportunity that will only happen probably once, maybe not many more, in anybody's lifetime. Now is the time to recognize it, as the Bible says, discern the times, and shine the light into the darkness. Each one of us can contribute, and that's what we're encouraging you all to do.
Thanks, Bill. I know that one of the things that occurred that changed really in many ways my wife, Jan, and our direction was in 2012 when we were in Washington, D.C. and we went to the Value Voters Summit, and we heard about this Frank Gaffney and this message regarding civilization, jihad, and Sharia, and so on. And we were getting to hear about that in the news a bit. So we went to this workshop that was just loaded with rather like-minded. And when we listened to that, I must say that ever since then, our concern, as we have paid attention to the day-by-day news unfolding, it has made us recognize the great urgency that we face here. And I think that one of the things that I would also say is that when you have a couple of men that are leading like both Bill and Frank, you recognize by the choices that they're making in their life, the sacrifice that they're making, that they're really in this thing. They're really, really in this, which makes persons like ourselves recognize we better wake up and start putting our hand to the job. I'm going to give you one. I know that before I'm asking this question, I just wanted to say this. So there's a couple over in Lowell, Michigan. When they heard Phil just recently speaking at a church, he was actually giving a message on that particular Sunday. They came up to me and they looked at me, and I've known them for a fair number of years, and they said, we just have decided between ourselves, we've looked at each other in the eye, we said, are you ready to just give it all up, just be ready to lose it all? We have a nice home, we've had good professions, and they both agreed, yes, the times are that serious. So they had about 100 different friends, and they got on the phone with each one of them, and they thought, we've done things together, we've liked each other, we've loved each other, we've helped them, they've helped us. This is time for us to just put our necks on the line, whether they reject this message or not. So they have scheduled a meeting for this coming Tuesday, and they're underwriting the cost of renting a room at the Grand Rapids Seminary in Grand Rapids, and inviting the people for the purpose of having Bill come and share this concern. And we're seeing these, this is just one response, but there are others that are like that. And I want to just say that one of the things that continues to fuel and feed Jan and I say this basically every day, is Frank Gaffney's radio show that we listen to every day. Frank, talk about that, would you, a little bit, how you go about it, the whole purpose of it, and what you're accomplishing.
Well, thank you. Great straight man. This is a program we call Secure Freedom Radio. And we've been doing it about 9 years now. Just this past year, we finally got a national syndication with the American Family Radio Network. I believe you can hear it here. I know you can out in the other part of the state, but it's nationwide on 200 stations. If you can't find it on the air, it runs it late at night, 11 o'clock in the East. It's easy to get on a podcast at that same website I gave you, where you can find all of our books, Secure Freedom Radio. So, securefreedom.org. I encourage you to check it out. I call it an intelligence briefing on the war for the free world. Because I think that's what we're in. I think that's what President Reagan was talking about, that existential threat to freedom in every generation, as Phil Haney has just said. This is our time's phase of that long-running war. In the case of this country, at this moment in time, we're facing, I think, particularly this threat from within. So we talk about that a fair amount. Usually 4 different segments. Occasionally it's one program devoted to one guest, but mostly it's covering with the best people I know, important, breaking often, or coming developments that you have a need to know about. Again, as I say, I think of it kind of as the owner's manual for your role as citizens of our country. And we'd like to think it'll help you just an hour a day, will help you be a better citizen, will help you have these conversations we're urging you to have, to step up and do what you can. And as I mentioned, there are lots of things you can do. It doesn't have to be, getting out in the hustings yourself. You can help others who are doing that. But I did just want to leave you with one thought, if I can, because for a lot of people, this just seems to be unimaginable. All of us that we're talking about. That's not to say that, individual people haven't had certain life experiences that people will credit. It's just that it can't happen here. I mean, really. The point is, and I have found this very effective, increasingly, as I kind of indicated briefly there is so much evidence of what is happening to Western countries very much like us in Europe that you really can't say it can't happen. It is happening. These countries, Sweden, for heaven's sakes, Great Britain, And we talked a little bit about Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson, the pastor was very gentle on this point, if I may just be a little bit more direct. He's talking about rape gangs that have been doing horrible torture and enslavement of thousands of British women and girls, many of them younger girls, for years. And you know what is the single most horrific thing about this? The authorities have known about it and have done nothing about it. Tommy Robinson's crime was he actually reported on a trial of people who were being prosecuted at last for doing this sort of thing. Of course, they are, almost without exception, South Asian immigrant men who are Sharia supremacists and who believe it is their right to do this to these kufr, these infidel, uncovered women and girls. So trust me. And if you don't want to trust me, just look at this yourself. It is no longer possible to say it can't happen in countries like ours. It is. And I'll just leave you with one other thought. A lot of this has to do with the fact that there is this religious thing to it, doesn't it? That plus the fact that people who profess to be faithful Muslims are threatening to kill people if they are offended by us. So those things are operating, no question about it. But part of what's also operating is, since the time of Joe McCarthy, back in the 1950s, it has been the ultimate act of political incorrectness to talk about the possibility that inside our own country, people could be trying to take us down. I mean, McCarthy's name has been turned into an attack noun or verb to vilify people who even point these things out. So when people like us come along and say, hey, you know, there are actually people here who say they are trying to destroy our country from within by our hands and theirs, it should be taken seriously. It's not McCarthyism, let alone Islamophobia. It's simply pointing out what they're saying themselves. But I just want to leave you with one other thing as you're talking to your kids, maybe, or your neighbors, or your colleagues at work. In Washington today, there is a growing awareness of another problem. You probably have heard something about it. It's mostly treated as an issue of craziness on the part of Donald Trump and his trade agenda. But there are now an increasing number of people who are starting to pay attention to communist China and what it is doing. And the interesting thing to me is, as a pretty close student of this, there's now a bipartisan sentiment in the Congress, among other places, that the Chinese are actually running influence operations as well as espionage and the like inside the United States. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because it's a problem in its own right. This is a country that has the capacity to do more and more and more harm to us, and I think makes, again, less and less secretive wanting to do so. But my point is this. It's okay, apparently, to acknowledge that the Chinese are doing things in our country aimed at subverting us that was heretofore unthinkable, unmentionable. Well, if it's true that that may be happening with the Chinese communists, then maybe, just maybe, we're beginning to see the space created where we can talk about this other problem, which is frankly much more advanced, and I believe much more imminent a problem.
The next question I'd like to ask Bill, how much time do we have left? Are we a couple more minutes? Okay. Phil, my last question to you would be this, that as we look at Michigan in the weeks and the days ahead, what is the best way for persons that are in this audience to get involved in bringing you into their local group and give them some assurances about it doesn't matter to you whether it's 500 or 50 or 5. And I've seen that firsthand, but I wanted to hear from your lips.
Thank you. I don't evaluate each event by the number of people that attend, because it could be one, and it could be a turning point moment with one person. But are there any district reps here for the campaign? Anybody that's actually involved in any of the political campaign? I'm only asking, okay, there's a couple, there's 3, and it's a generic question. But here, right in this group, there are at least 4. If you're wondering what you might be able to do in the lead up to the primary and then up to the general election, seek out one of these people, and I mean again generically, and simply ask them, what can I do to help you? Anything from putting rubber bands around envelopes right up to knocking on doors, putting signs, whatever they ask you to do, help them. That's a way of doing something very down to earth and concrete between now and what is it now, 52 days before the primary, and graduate from the temptation to think that it won't really do any good, because that is a trap that we too easily have stepped into that is really not true. You'd be surprised how much difference a little bit of effort on everybody's part would make. So look back on this time, as it says with Oswald Chambers, to do your utmost for the sake of our country and for His highest, because, by the way, they are compatible. Your walk of faith is completely compatible with activity in the political arena. And what do I base that on? The Declaration of Independence. It says that our Creator instituted government among men, to paraphrase, in order to protect the liberties that He so generously endowed us with. There's no point of conflict in helping protect the liberties that we were endowed with. So that would be my encouragement. It's not that difficult to reach out, find somebody, ask them what to do, and then start with that.
Thank you, Phil.